So you know that scene in Star Wars: Return of the Jedi when Luke is on the moon of Endor and he turns himself into the stormtroopers and that one guard in the gray suit, and they take him to meet with Vader, Darth Vader, his father, and Luke is having this dialogue with Vader. They're left alone, and Luke is having like a conversation with his dad, and he's reading his dad, like totally reading his heart and reading him like yesterday's news. He knows everything about the inner conflict within Anakin, his dad. And so the conversation is like this. He's like, I sense the good in you. Um, that he can sense the conflict within him, and he says that that's why he couldn't destroy him. That's why he couldn't kill him, is because he still has this conflict of good within him. And Luke senses it. He knows it. Vader doesn't have to say anything. He's using the power of the Force to read his dad, his emotions, his inside inner conflict, and he points it out. He calls him on it, and Vader doesn't have to say a word because he already knows that Luke is right. And it ends up Luke turns himself in anyway to be submitted to the Emperor. And there's something that always stood out about that scene with me, and it's about this. I think it's because I think George Lucas is Jewish. He's got a Jewish background, and he probably knows about some of this inner conflict stuff that's in the Bible. This inner stuff that's there. If that's not said, it's not spoken. There's lessons to be learned. There's things that the Bible is teaching, the Bible is saying, but it's not in the text. It's you have to draw it out. You have to dig for it. There are lessons and important life, yeah, life lessons to learn. It's. I guess I'm gonna title this video. It's part 6 in the series of how to study the Bible. Not that I'm an expert on studying the Bible. I didn't go to yeshiva. I didn't go to seminary, but I've got a lot of years, and I've studied with Jews and pastors, and I've learned it's not just what the Bible says that's important, but I think it's equally as important to notice what the Bible doesn't say, what it's saying by not saying something. And what I mean by that is there's examples in the Bible, all throughout the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, that are life lessons that aren't necessarily like in your face. You have to dig for it. Things that are not spoken. You have to search it out, kind of like the way Luke searched out his dad's heart. And it takes some time to learn how to hear what the Bible is saying when it's not saying stuff. So, an example I have of that is if you go to Genesis 22, verse 2, there is the conversation between God and Abraham, right? Abraham already has the promised son, Isaac, and he's also had Ishmael, and he sent Ishmael and Hagar away. And so now it's just God and Abraham, and God is asking Abraham to sacrifice his son. The promise of his legacy, the promise that God promised him, is now in question. And so we have the conversation where it says, Adonai says to Abraham, he says, give me your son, your only son, whom you love. And you have to ask the question, okay, he knows that Isaac is his son, right? Why does he have to say your only son? Like, have you ever thought of that? Whenever you read things in the Bible that are very repetitive, it's like it's obvious it's Isaac. So why does he have to say your son, your only son, whom you love? Is there like a hidden conversation between Abraham and God in that wasn't written down by Moses? That is like it kind of went like this, maybe. Hey Abraham, I'm asking you to sacrifice your son, and Abraham might have responded, "You mean Ishmael?" And he said, and then God might have to say, "No, your only son, the one whom you love." not Ishmael, Isaac. And I know it's not in the text, but maybe that's how it kind of went down. And so those are the kind of things that you might want to ask as you're reading is why is God, or why is Moses, God speaking through Moses to write down your son, your only son, the one you love. And if you're just reading through it quickly, you might just overlook all that. But there might be kind of a conversation to learn from there, some lesson to learn from there, about the inner struggle with Abraham and how he's kind of denying the truth of what God's asking of him. Kind of like the way we kind of have our conversations with God when he's asking us to do something, and we kind of drag our feet because we know it's not something that we necessarily might want to do. And he has to say it again, like a parent has to tell a child over and over again sometimes before they get it. I think that's kind of some of the things that we see in the writings of Moses. Another example is in Exodus 4:14, and it's the conversation between God and Moses this time. And this is where he just had his encounter with the burning bush, where God first calls him out, and he makes all these excuses where he says he doesn't want to be the kind of he doesn't think he's the fit person to take on the role of being the savior of the Jewish people from, or the Hebrew people from the the Egyptians. And so there's this one scene where he's like, I can't speak very well, and so he says, I'm going to send Aaron, your brother. He's a good speaker, but he doesn't just say I'm going to send Aaron. He says, I'm going to send Aaron, your brother, the Levite, and to help you. And you have to ask yourself again, why does he have to explain it to Moses? I'm sending Aaron. You have a brother named Aaron, and he's a Levite also. Do you think maybe Moses didn't know that he had a brother? Because maybe he knew his brother in Egypt was Ramses, the one he grew up with in Pharaoh's house. And that's who he could have been thinking was God's going to send him. But he says, no, Aaron, your Hebrew brother, the one that you don't know of yet, because you were separated from your family at a young age. And Moses still thinks of himself as an Egyptian. He hasn't quite identified yet as a Hebrew. He hasn't even circumcised his son yet, his son Gershon. And God's about to slay him. He even talks about that in one of the later verses, that God's going to kill Moses. He sends the Spirit to kill him because he hasn't circumcised his son. So why is he going to kill him? Because he doesn't circumcise his son? It's because it's about identification, right? It's a sign. It's the sign of the Hebrews that you identify. You're separating yourself to be God's people. You're crossing over from the rest of the world to be, a circumcised follower of God, Adonai, the monotheistic God, not the like the everyone else who worship many gods, polytheism. Yeah, a lot of this kind of stuff, you have to kind of have an investigative mindset, I guess, to draw this kind of stuff out. And when you do, you find valuable lessons about identity, about how Moses didn't identify yet as a Jew. And so that's why he kind of felt hesitant to speak to the Jewish elders, because he still identified as an Egyptian, right? They, even when Zipporah and her sister saw him at the well and he saved them from the shepherds, he still looked like a Mitzrayim, right? They called him the Mitzrayim because Mitzrayim means Egypt, right? The land of enclosed space, a confined space, to be oppressed. That's what Egypt means. It means Mitzrayim means Egypt, and it means like the house of contention. And he looked like an Egyptian still. And so he acted like an Egyptian. He identified as an Egyptian. He probably spoke with an Egyptian accent. And so when Moses is making this excuse that he can't speak, he says, "Okay, I'll send your son, Aaron. Your brother, your Hebrew brother, because you're a Hebrew." Um, Yeah, that's the kind of lessons that you learn if you start kind of looking for the things the Bible is not saying, like outright. Third, I've got 7 examples to kind of prove my point. You might say, "Oh, what's this guy talking about? He's the Bible, things that the Bible doesn't say." And you might think that, "Oh, that's just one point of view. It might not be right." But if I've got like 1 or 2 or 3 examples, you might be able to toss it out and say he doesn't know what he's talking about. Those are just coincidences. But when you've got like 6 or 7 or 8 or 12, you start to see a lot of examples of this throughout Scripture. That's something you can kind of bet your house on, that there's stuff in the Bible that aren't necessarily just in your face, easy to read. There's stuff that's hidden. And the next kind of hidden thing is when Moses is bringing them out of Egypt, when they're crossing the Red Sea, and the Egyptians are on their tail, and the sea's in front of them, and it seems like they're trapped, and they can't get out. And Moses starts praying to God. He's crying out to God. And what does God say? In Exodus 14:15, he says, "Why are you crying to me? Why do you think God would? It doesn't it seem kind of weird that God would ask Moses, 'Why are you crying to him?' Doesn't it seem kind of obvious if God's looking at this situation with the Egyptians on their tail and the sea in front of them and they have nowhere else to go? That isn't that kind of weird that God would say, 'Why are you crying to me, Moses?' It's kind of obvious, right? But it's not a question of like literally what's the reason why Moses is crying. That's not what he's asking. Like he's not saying, Moses, what's the reason for your crying? He's really saying, why are you crying to me right now? Like, why are you crying to me? You've got the Egyptians on your tail. Lift up your staff. Tell them to walk through the water. I will divide it. He's basically saying there's times for prayer and there's times for action. And this is a time for action. Stop praying. Get down there, raise your arms, lift up your staff, and divide the water and command them to walk through it. That's a life lesson, right? That yes, it's great to pray. We should be praying about all things, right? That's what I think that says. It says that, I think Paul says that in the New Testament, pray about all things. But God is trying to teach a lesson to Moses here, saying that yes, pray about all things, but when there's time to action, where you shouldn't be praying, you should take action. Lesson learned. Next point is in the New Testament. For those of you who are kind of getting bored of all the Old Testament stuff, here's a New Testament gem I'll throw at you. In John 21, verse 11, we have Jesus encountering the disciples and they're fishing, and he tells them to cast their nets down, and they cast their nets down, and they catch 153 fish. It's not just 153 fish, it's 153 species of fish. Yeah. And they catch so many, and they are able to. This is the second great catch, miraculous catch. And this time, unlike the first great catch, their nets don't break. And it actually says that. And their boats don't sink. Because in the first great catch, as accorded by, was it Luke? Yeah, in Luke chapter 5, um, there were so many fish that their nets broke and their boats were sinking. And this was Paul and Simon. He said before he was called Paul. Oh, no, Peter. This is Peter before he was called Peter, when he was named Simon. And he says, "Lord, get away from me, for I'm not a clean man." Basically he's corrupted. That's the scene in the first great catch. And so you see, Peter's not ready to be a disciple. He still feels inadequate. He feels like he's a sinner. He doesn't deserve to be one of his Talmud, one of his disciples. And so that's true. It's represented in the nets that were breaking. His nets weren't ready to go catch men, to save souls, to represent God in his kingdom. And he knew it. And those nets were symbolic. His boats were sinking. He knew it. But later on, as we see in John's gospel, chapter 21:11, the nets don't break. And you have to ask the question. It's not just, you know, about the disciples and going from a state of not being ready to being ready, being symbolized in their nets and their boats. But have you ever asked the question, why does he make the point of 153 fish? What's significant about that? Because he could have just said there was a great catch and there were so many fish, but John takes the time to write the words 153 to record that different species. And if you didn't know, at that time in the world, there was 153 known nations or 153 like dialects of speech or 153 sovereign states in the world. Um, and that was symbolic of them catching men from every tribe, every nation, every tongue, which was what we see later happening in the book of Acts when they get the gift of tongues and they're speaking in every dialect, every language. Um, but yeah, that's the reason why there's 153. But do you see what I'm talking about now? Are you kind of starting to see it's important to notice the things that the Bible, well, I guess it kind of says it, but it doesn't say it clearly. It's important to note the things, yes, that the Bible says, but it's also important to note the things that are kind of mentioned but not focused on. Because you'll start to realize that everything that's in the Bible, they put it there for a reason. The authors, the Holy Spirit inspired them. God told them, messaged them to put these points into the Bible so that they can teach you a lesson. Okay, number 6, the gold coin in the fish's mouth, right? This is again New Testament. This is when Simon Peter and Yeshua, Jesus are after the Mount of Transfiguration, they're going to the temple and they encounter a man who's collecting the taxes for the temple. If you're not familiar with the book of Leviticus, when the temple was when the tent of meeting was being constructed, they're given the instructions on the tent of meeting and how to build it. And it's called the Mishkan, and the actual erected, built like brick and mortar temple was called the Mikdash later. But when they were given the instructions for the Mishkan, the tent of meeting, they were also given instructions on a temple tax, which is a half shekel rule. When you go to the temple, you're supposed to bring a half shekel and make that as an offering before you enter. Now, why is it a half shekel and not a full shekel when there's no such thing as a half shekel coin, right? There's only a shekel coin. So when you go, the idea is about community. It was always meant to be something that you don't just go to the temple by yourself. You go there to have communion with your fellow man as well as with God. And so the rule of the half shekel is so that you can always bring someone with you. And so understanding this foundation in the Old Testament helps you understand what Yeshua was talking about when he made this miracle. And you might not have ever noticed this because you probably never learned this and you read it really quickly as you're reading through Leviticus. But Yeshua is teaching a lesson to Peter here. And he says, what does he say? He asked Peter, is it right for the son or for the strangers to pay the tax to enter his father's house? And he asked that to Peter or Simon, and Simon answers, the son shouldn't have to pay to enter his father's house. It's for the strangers. And he says, right, you are, but to please these people, basically, not to cause any ripples and make any waves. He's basically telling Peter, go throw a line out into the water, catch a fish. In the fish's mouth there'll be a shekel, a gold coin, right? And that will pay for you and it will pay for me, right? Basically he's saying, you're a son now. You're like me. You're entering your father's house. He's going from being this sinner, this dirty fisherman who didn't feel adequate to follow his master, to be a talmid to this rabbi, to becoming a son, an heir, right? He's saying this will pay for you and it'll pay for me. this covers you, Peter. I'm asking you to be the person who shares this shekel with me. And yeah, it's what the Bible. This is another point. The Bible teaches us things that's not necessarily said unless you actually understand. It is said in the Old Testament, but it's not said in the teaching of Yeshua here. But if you understand the teaching of Yeshua and how it relates to Leviticus, that's when you start to pull the full gem, the full, I guess, inheritance of what the scriptures have to offer. You're getting both the New Testament and the Old. You're getting the full example of what Yeshua was trying to teach to Peter. And, if you're just living a life of a Christian who doesn't know what he's being grafted into, then you're missing out on the full nutrients of what you can have and all the fruit that you can, abundance of fruit that you could produce if you knew this. Lessons that you can teach other people. Okay, last story. Going back to the Old Testament, okay? Um let me just read to you. Before we do that, I'll read you the passage of the half shekel. Starting with Matthew 17, verse 24 through 27. When they came to Kafar Nahum, the collectors of the half shekel came to Kepha, Simon Peter, and said, "Doesn't your rabbi pay the temple tax?" "Of course he does," said Kepha. When he arrived home, Yeshua spoke first. "Shimon, what's your opinion? The kings of the earth, from whom do they collect duties and taxes? From their sons or from others?" "From others," he answered. The sons are Then Yeshua said, "The sons are exempt. But to avoid offending them, go to the lake, throw out a line, and take the first fish you catch. Open its mouth, and you will find a shekel. Take and give it to them for me and for you." Okay, last point. The Noah story. Noah. Um, I'll just read the passage. "And Noah began to be a husbandman, and he planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine, and was drunken, and he was uncovered within his tent. And Ham, that's his youngest son, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his two brothers. And Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it upon both of their shoulders, and they went backwards and covered the nakedness of their father. And their faces were backward, and they saw not their father's nakedness. And Noah woke with his wine, and knew what his younger son had done to him. And he said, Cursed be Canaan, cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren." That's Genesis 9:20 through 25. So I have this question. If Ham was the one who saw the nakedness of his father, the quote unquote nakedness of his father, then why is Noah cursing his son Canaan, not Ham? Have you ever asked that question, or have you just overread that and just gone through it and kept reading on without noticing that? Have you ever asked the question, what does it mean by the nakedness of his father? And if you go ahead, and I'll just tell you real quickly, if you go to Leviticus 18, verse 7, where it talks about sexual immorality, this is what the book of Acts is referring to in chapter 15, where they're giving the 4 laws for the Gentiles to follow. Don't eat blood. Gentiles are not to eat things that are strangled. They're not to eat things offered to idols, and they're not to partake in sexual morality. When Paul is talking about sexual morality, or Peter is talking about sexual morality, he's talking all the way back to here in Leviticus chapter 18 through 20, the inappropriate relationships, okay? So if you ever have a question, what's sexual immorality? Go to Leviticus 18 through 20. And it's all the relationships that are forbidden, because it's like incestuous and bestiality, homosexuality, all the ones that God thinks are he abhors, that are an abomination. And so in 18 verse 7, very interesting verse, it says, "The nakedness of thy father or the nakedness of thy mother shall thou not uncover. She is your mother. You shall not uncover her nakedness." Now, it starts off talking about the nakedness of the Father, but it explains what the nakedness of the Father is. The nakedness of the Father is to see your mother naked, because your mother belongs to your father, not to you. So if you uncover your father's nakedness, you're uncovering your mother naked. And so think about that, and then you think about what Ham did. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and he told his brothers. He boasted about it. Basically, he had incest and he slept with his mom while Noah was drunk and passed out. He took his mom, and so when Noah finally awoke from his and got sober and realized what had happened, he cursed. He didn't curse Ham. He cursed the offspring of Ham because the offspring of Ham was an abomination. Does it make more sense now? If it does, that's how it's supposed to be. It's supposed to make sense. So then you have to ask the question, why is it so confusing? Why doesn't he just say, when Moses was writing this, why didn't Moses just say that Noah cursed Ham because Ham had incest with his mom, with Noah's wife? Why doesn't it just say that? Well, there's a very valuable lesson to be learned here that I learned about a year ago when I really started digging into wanting to learn how to walk in the footsteps of each of these patriarchs. And it's about shame and dignity. And when I started really almost become friends with these guys by reading their stories and learning their hearts, I didn't want to shame them. And I think that's what I'm pretty sure that's what Moses is doing here. By not just point blank shooting hurling a spear at Noah, he doesn't want to because he knows Noah is a Zodiac, right? He's one of the two men in Torah in all the books that Moses says is a righteous man. And so to protect his his respect for Noah, to kind of shield it and guard Noah, he doesn't just point blank say that Noah's wife was involved in an incestuous relationship, right? Noah's exotic. He understands that. And so he doesn't want to shame him. He wants to protect his dignity in a way. He wants to protect the nakedness of Noah. He's already been taken advantage of once, right? So why shame him again by telling the story point blank? So he's kind of doing it in a careful way. He's being careful like the two sons Shem and Japheth. He's walking backwards, trying to cover the shame of Noah by saying that's the nakedness within the Noah story. And then when you find out in Leviticus, you get to the book of Leviticus 4 books later or 3 books later, that's where you see his explanation of what he's talking about in the Noah story. And that's a really good lesson to learn about all the patriarchs, because Moses also had his shame and his nakedness, right? With the kind of with the rock. But it's not like what most pastors teach. There's something to that story and about the hitting of the rock that you have to dig a little bit more. And I'm not going to talk about that today because this is getting kind of long. And I just want to kind of end with that. I would challenge you to try and use these principles. If you read the Noah story again, think about all the things that happened to Noah, about his family, those who died, those who left him, how the rock stopped producing water. And it was, you could think about it. The Bible only says that the rock gives two stories about the water for Israel. One is the Mara, where the stick is thrown in, it makes it bitter water sweet. And the other one's 3 days after that. So they're 6 days in the desert and they need water again, right? Because every 3 days you need to drink or you're going to die. And so it doesn't tell you any stories about the rest of the 40 years they were in the desert and how they survived without water. So you got to ask, how did they survive? Right? I'll leave you with that. Think about those things. Think about his sister, how she died before that rock was struck at Oreb. Um, and yeah, and then think about this story. See what kind of gems you might pull out as you read through this. So if you like this, please like and subscribe. That would help me a lot. And share my channel with other people. That's the pebble for your shoe today. Take it or leave it. Oh, why do I have Luke Skywalker here? Um, it's because he knows how to read the things that are hidden. It's kind of my little joke for the day. Um, anyway, peace, shalom, bye, thanks.